Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art, Monday, May 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm Alex Cohen, Programming Director of Artist Talk on Art. Artist Talk on Art is the world's longest-running art panel forum in art history. Founded in 1974, ATOA has held and recorded over 1,200 events in audio and video, featuring more than 9,000 artists and other art professionals. All ATO events are recorded, copyrighted, and then posted to our YouTube channel, Artist Talk on Art 2026. Please hold your questions or comments until the last part of our 90-minute event and remain muted until that time. Tonight's dialogue is a legacy panel from 2006 featuring Deborah Grant, Kehinde Wiley, Nadine Robinson, Christine Kim, and Anne Lydecker. This program also celebrates the Studio Museum in Harlem's remarkable growth from its early years to its current expansion into a 160 million building, alongside more than 300 million in total funding, reflecting its continued prominence as a major cultural institution in Upper Manhattan. And now we'll play the video and hear from them.
As we begin our new season, I want to pause for a minute to thank our host, the School of Visual Art, for their generosity, and the audiovisual department and its director, Rob Barton, who is not here at the moment, but all of the crew for their help each season. This fall marks a sort of watershed for us because we are engaged in a major focus on preserving 33 years of an archive of audiovisual recordings. It comprises about 850 programs, 6,000 artists, both audio and video, and so we are now the recipient of a grant from NEA, and we're gathering other funds, and in fact, for that purpose, we're planning an auction on November 13th at the Chelsea Art Museum. You'll find in the front there's a little postcard about the event. We've had a lot of really generous donations of art. There's beautiful art. Over 100 artists will be featured in both a silent and live auction. So that's November 13th. If you would like to either bid online, which I'm told is up and running and you could do so, you can simply go to www.atoaauction.com, or you could also purchase tickets there. If you're not getting our flyer, and this is what the fall flyer looks like, make sure to give us your name and address and zip and get on the mailing list. Before I introduce tonight's panel, I'd like to mention next week's event. The Chinese contemporary art scene has become, I think you could say, searingly hot. And we have some experts and some Chinese artists who are residing in the U.S. at the moment who will be with us next week. That panel was put together by, is going to be moderated by Matthew Borsovitz, who is both a curator and critic, an expert on the contemporary Chinese scene. And the panelists include Zhu Bing, artist and a winner of the MacArthur Genius Award, Jack Tilton, a New York gallerist, Lin Yilin, a performance artist, Zhang Jinyong, an artist and coordinator of the Shanghai Biennial, and Christopher Phillips, a curator at ICP and critic for art in America. So that's next Friday the 6th here. If you have any cell phones, I've turned mine off. Please turn your cell phones, pagers, or other electronic devices off. And there's no recording permitted. And now for tonight's panel, I'd like to tell you a little bit about its moderator, Christine Kim. Christine is the associate curator at the Studio Museum of Harlem, where she has curated such exhibitions as Freestyle in 2001, Black Belt in 2003, Africaine in 2003, Miche Gaba in 2005, and Frequency in 2005. She also manages the Historic Artist in Residence program at the museum, in which artists such as David Hammonds, Kerry James Marshall, Nora Ward, Nadine Robinson, Kahinda Wiley, a number of artists and Deborah Grant, and others have participated. She received her MA from NYU in 1998, spent 2 years at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and has been at the Studio Museum since 2000. Christine.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you, SVA, for this invitation. As Doug said, I'm the associate curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And I think that the Studio Museum, there are people who know it from its sort of old incarnations and other people who know it from its most recent exhibitions and programs. And before I introduce the artists, I just wanted to let you know that the Studio Museum in Harlem has a funny name. It's called the Studio Museum because the first program at the museum, unlike a number of museums which start out with collections or start out with an exhibition program, the museum started out as a studio program on 125th Street and 5th Avenue with the idea of looking at what contemporary artists are making at the moment, especially in 1968 coming out of civil rights and not only seeing but fully recognizing the need for museums that are culturally specific and serve people of color, that instead of adhering to and developing the existing vernacular and vocabulary discussing black art that was sort of by the textbook or by, in other words, European American historians, that a group of artists and art professionals and colleagues got together and decided to start this program really based on inviting artists in and starting to work with them and starting a conversation that really started with the art and studio practice and what was happening there, and then to develop the discourse from there. Over the years of the program, we've had numerous participants, and tonight is a very special night where we have invited 3 recent participants of the program. To my left is Kahinda Wiley. He completed the program in 2002. He received his BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute in 1999 and his MFA from Yale in 2001. I forgot to mention that he was born in Los Angeles in 1977. To his left is Deborah Grant, who completed the Artist in Residence program in 2003. Deborah was born in Toronto in 1968, received her BFA from Columbia College in Chicago in 1996, and her MFA from Tyler School of Art at Temple University in 1999. And finally, on the end is Nadine Robinson, born in 1968 in London. She received her BFA from SUNY in 1993 and MFA from NYU in 1997. Additionally, she has a work called Alice Grau, a major installation up at the Studio Museum right now that'll run through October 22nd. So without further ado, I know that these artists have brought some visuals and some materials, so we'll start with Kahinda's work. They'll talk about their work for about 10 minutes, then we can sort of address maybe a couple of questions and open it up to the audience.
Okay, I'll be brief. So what I've included here are some earlier works, and then I'll give you a quick rundown on what I was doing with them and why. What you're seeing here is possibly the last painting that I did at Yale, and it was the culmination of a series of paintings that dealt with hair and the sexualization of the black male body. I was thinking about hair as something sort of Samsonian, biblical, phallic. That sort of phallic imagery followed through into other paintings. You can see here early on, I began experimenting with color, really taking a look at historical quotation as a muse. This particular painting borrowing from some of the more acerbic sweetness that comes out of people like Fragonard and so on. Fast forward a few years later, post-Studio Museum, I did this exhibition, but it's important to talk about this in the context of the museum. When I moved to New York, the Studio Museum was where I began this body of work, and many of the models were from Harlem, and it was important that I was in Harlem because I began engaging people very directly, literally going out into the streets and bringing models to the studio, asking them to assume poses from classical paintings. And it wouldn't have really occurred to me to do that without existing in a city that was so drastically different from Los Angeles, so much more of a pedestrian urgency to it. So these arched panels comprise a body of work that was more of an installation that tried to become a faux Venetian chapel. Attendant to this is a ceiling fresco that's roughly about 20 feet in length. My more recent body of work involves equestrian portraiture, military portraiture that involves horses. My concerns with painting have to do with power and the distillation of power down to its most essential components and signs. Many of the paintings have sperm cells swimming through the plane. Oftentimes the men are painted in the exact scale as the original paintings. Many of these paintings being something you'd see in all the great collections in Europe, large history painting, a lot of chest beating, and the frames themselves are customized to give that sense of museum scale, power. Many of the works are gilded with gold leaf. One of them is, yeah. This one is currently at the Brooklyn Museum, although the work initially was exhibited at Deitch Projects roughly 9 months ago. My most recent project is Columbus, a project that uses the models from Columbus, Ohio, a city that's used for much of American target marketing process. All of the models were asked to assume poses from the Columbus Museum's permanent collection. The installation was to create a sense of the French salon with wainscoting and fabric wallpapers. Many of the decorative components are coming from William Morris, the arts and crafts movement. The green here coming from Martha Stewart's 1999 home collection. So I'm going to just run through those. There we go.
Thank you, Kahinde. Deborah Grant.
So this is an installation shot from Roebling Hall. This past spring, I had a show called A Gin Cure. I'll give you a little brief idea of what I was trying to think about in regards to it. 2 years ago, I decided to do Pablo Picasso's Guernica. At times sort of reference everything about war, but presently I tried not to do that. I tried to use the genesis of the idea of choosing Guernica as a way of going back to my youth. And I basically went back to a 6x9-inch drawing that was my mother had cut out at one of the books that Brooklyn Museum had sort of tossed out in the early 70s during the time that they were doing the King Tut exhibition. She basically cut it out and put it in sort of like a sun-drenched, water-drenched frame, sort of makeshift, sort of put together and put it in there. And I've been seeing it my entire life. So I chose to look at Guernica and change it into a conversation on anagram wordplay, and change it to 3 syllables of a gin cure. sort of adjunct cure, sort of the relief for surviving a hangover, the experience that has happened to the present. So that's sort of why I wanted to combine a little bit of my youth, but at the same time combine some of the events of today, the past. I use things like, for my material use, I kind of use Life magazines between 1950 and 1970, preferably, to sort of deal with the conversation on war. And so that's sort of part of what I want to do with this particular exhibition. So when I was choosing my source materials in regards to reference books, I chose Norman Mailer's book, Picasso's Young Man, and I used Rosalind Krauss's book, The Picasso Papers, as an example of the two books that I wanted to use for references around doing this piece. Norman Mailer's book was more about the idea of dealing with Picasso's formative years, and then Rosalind Krauss dealt with more of the ideas that had to do with appropriation and also the ideas around Picasso, or the Picasso mystique. I guess at first I sort of took a kind of pure extreme feminist position around Picasso, but as I got into the works, I realized that I felt like Picasso was more of a woman, as I was really looking at the images and looking very carefully at how they were constructed, and also looking at the relationship of some of the images, how they were used to, I guess, do I go forward? Forward there. How do I?
No, you can just
this one?
push this
one? Oh, this one, right button. So this is the first up front on installation of the pieces. So what I decided to do is sort of break them up into actual recognizable names that came from books that happened to be on the banned list between 1956 and 1960. And specifically I used books that sort of proclaimed the ideas that dealt with quotations from Chairman Mao, which happened to be the bull piece, the bull image over to the far left. And then also, as well as images that had to deal with ideas from the movie Persona. I used one piece called Katrina and Alma on the Rocks. It's the running woman from the house with the aborted fetus, which is underneath the pouring out woman below. So I guess as I was working on the project, I felt like if I was going to really do this project, I did like Sean Lander's piece that I saw at Andrea Rosen. That was probably the first time I really got a sense of seeing an artist really do a proper appropriation of the work. I thought it was strong because he used examples of his own personal life. So I decided to do that exact same thing, combine personal life as well as things that I thought reflected human life, or the human frailty of life, if anything. Titles include Philistines. Philistines call them infidels. I use that for The Walking Woman, which is to the far left below the bull. Other titles: Good and Beyond Good and Beyond Good and Evil, which is The Woman with the Dead Baby. And then I also used invented images, which were the two bulls and the woman caught in the bulls, either side of the horse. The horse itself is called Pegasus II. And I sort of used the dismembered soldier. I kind of split him into two and called that Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2 as an example. And then I also going back to some of the early works that I was doing at the Studio Museum. I was working with blackboards, and what I was doing with them was combining words and image interplay. And in some cases, I would use adhesive letters for the words, and then have actual permanency of the material, which was enamel pens that I was working directly on the board. So I worked the same way in this fashion, but I decided to change some of the ideas around the actual titles of some of these, and I changed them to kind of suit what I was thinking about. There were a total of 34 blackboards. In this case, I put 3 for the actual exhibition at Roebling. And to the far left, up in the far left, it's Women of Delano Village, which is up in the upper far left. Women of Delano Village is a housing project that's up in here in New York City. It had to deal with the removal of elderly women out of the project to make way for luxury living. And so I sort of combined ideas of these titles and changed them around to sort of fit what I wanted them to work with. For instance, number 13, which is, I guess, Henry Bendel's In the Afternoon, which is the far one on the underneath. I guess that one. Maybe say. No, there's Henry Bendel's. It's under the text piece of Picasso's thing. It has to do with women who are crying in the afternoon at Henry Bendel's after a shopping spree. But anyway, I guess my idea was just to try and play around with the images, but at this time removing the text. The far text of the one panel up above, Henry Bendel's In the Afternoon, which is the text image, it basically has the whole details of Picasso's handwriting and different variations of his handwriting, including his father's version, which is Ruiz. Basically, with that particular piece, I called "If He Plans to Enter the U.S., Please Let Us Know," which had to do with I can't think of his name right now. It had to do with the whole Red Scare and the fact that Picasso was associated with the Rosens, who actually were murdered by the United States government. I can go on to all kinds of things, but that's my own personal opinion coming through. But basically, that's what that particular piece is called. And then next to it is called EBT, Last of the EBT, which has to do with the last of the electronic benefit transfer, something more current. And then this piece is called Dear Mr. Lilly. It's a wood piece, again, custom wood piece. I kind of wanted to play with this and the idea of how you would look at script or quick doodle or the idea of graffiti. And so I combined all the images from Guernica and combined them in as one. So this was called Dear Mr. Lilly. And this is Pegasus. In this case, I wanted to do Pegasus more in the conversation of abstraction. So I worked with the detailed paint pens that I work with, along with micron pens, and kind of worked with the detail with paper and glue and paint and wood, and sort of combined images, and that sort of have like a mix in it. And this is Cast Your Gaze Across the Abandoned Lots and West 36th Street. And this is Chairman Mao, quotations from Chairman Mao. Humanist Manifesto, Part 1 and Part 2. And this is Beyond Good and Evil. Again, using the paint pens, sort of using ideas from comic book theory, combining ideas that sort of deal with conspiracy theories or made-up conspiracy theories. The whole idea around the series, all this work, is sort of seriousing around the idea of random select, which is this idea that I've chosen to choose random images, whether they be social, political, religious, and kind of combine them together with selected images. And how do those images sort of play with each other, or do they cancel each other out? It's a detail. It's a detail from Mr. Lilly. Another detail. And then I started moving to a series of drawings in which I just sort of did an all-over drawing. These pieces are roughly 22 by 38. And basically what I wanted to do with the drawing was sort of combine images. This is called 21st Century Sandinistas. And again, it's combining the pen and the ink and just sort of playing around with certain images, but sort of downplaying the size of the images, repositioning them. This is called The Leap. This is called People's History, Part 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And we have Nadine Robinson.
So I know I came late, so I didn't get the prompts. Hopefully I can salvage something. So,
Use the mic.
I was born in London in the 68. I came to the Bronx, New York, 77. I've been there ever since. That's where I'm coming from, a long way. It's like an hour on the train. It's close to, I'm on the Westchester border, Northeast Bronx. And growing up there and studying art in New York City is pretty much my point of departure when it comes to making work. And as you see on the screen, you'll see 2 turntables and a microphone. So I basically, my work is the intersection of personal narratives and history, other various cultural histories, and fuse that with a sense that the artist has social responsibility and also an aim to challenge the project of postmodernism and modernism at the same time. So, this piece is the detail of Big Baby Blue, and I began to work using textual minimalist, well, I call them textual minimalism because there's certain exhibitions in the early 90s that led me to want to do this work. Not only was it the work of, I guess, interns like Christine Kim and Thelma Gould and the curator of the Whitney Museum, the growth of multicultural histories in institutions, educational institutions like this one in the early 90s, as well as certain pivotal biennials that had many people of color making work. That wasn't so much, that had a lot to do with identity, but became didactic. So, after seeing a show at MoMA called Dislocations, I believe it was Dislocations, 93, and seeing Bruce Norman's theatrical piece, I saw Adrian Piper's, and work, and I wanted to do work that was effective emotionally, but also had not the arrogance, but a kind of impact that I felt when I went to see Robert Ryman's retrospective at the same museum, probably a couple years before or after that, I'm not sure. So we'll move forward. Is this how you, okay. It's a fuzzy slide. So these are two panels, Big Baby Blue, version 1. They're 10 feet by 10 feet each. They have speakers in them. It's a working sound system / painting. Basically, I wanted people to spin the painting. I was kind of abhorred by the assumed arrogance of like Robert Morris minimalism, the imposing structure in the room that just functioned as art for itself but had no function. And so I wanted to place myself there in the MoMA, you know, black girl from the Bronx in the MoMA, using this blue painting that was the same color of the blue at the record cover albums of Sugar Hill Gang's. Does anyone know of any history of hip-hop? Yeah. So the Sugar Hill Gang and the record company that produced them pretty much used this blue in all the record album covers. So I use it as sort of an icon of sort of placing my identity into modernism. This is China Shag, another textured minimalist piece. It's used hair extensions, my own hair extensions I've been taken out. I have hair extensions in my hair, and I've been using them since the 80s. I studied fashion before I studied history at FIT in the 80s. So I'd been collecting them for 3 years, and I knew I wanted to do something with them, so it's sort of an Ad Reinhardt kind of piece, this 8-foot-tall shag carpet.
It's a self-portrait.
It's a self-portrait. It's self-portrait #1, China Shag. And I'm working on another piece with George Bush with this piece, so we're going to be seeing some new work in a couple of years. This is called Das Hochzeit House. It's also speakers. It's around maybe 12 feet tall. It played a soundtrack of Speaking in Tongues, Holy Laughter. It was, Das Hochzeit House means the wedding house, and basically it was a piece about my own spiritual place, Pentecostalism, sound systems, and a Renaissance building in Hamlin called Das Hochzeit House, and the Pied Piper. We'll get back to that later. This is Das Rattenfänger House, which is German for the rat catcher's house. Both the house before and this one, basically half-timbered Renaissance houses in the Hamlin that still exist today, that have written on the timbers the story of the Pied Piper of Hamlin. I was using the Pied Piper of Hamlin as a way of speaking about the social inequalities of the African American person in the U.S., in the world, in fact. Not paying the piper, wage slavery, so on. The soundtrack for this was an instrumental of American fife and drums, like, basically patriotic instrumental music that just sort of played through the large woofers. This is actually not a detail of it. Must be mixed up. This is a detail of The Great Pretender. We'll go back to that. This is called The Great Pretender. And it's also very large, probably 13 by 13 feet, has 8-inch woofers in this grid. The record that's playing is The Platters, Oh Yes, I'm the Great Pretender. It's basically a found record. I pasted a photo of myself. Let's say go back. There, a self-portrait of myself on the label. So it's a kind of tongue-in-cheek piece about what my project was itself, whether I was failing or succeeding as an artist. And also about the ontology of painting, whether this was a painting, a sculpture, a sound system. It's also working with the interplay of different mediums, different aesthetics. This is also something very personal, kind of a self-portrait, Great White Me. And it's references China Shag, the large great hair painting, but this is synthetic white hair with text which references Ryman, a series of hair portraits called White We. So the references are multifaceted, and they range. There's a certain, they're not all over the place, but there's a lot of them. This is Tower Hollers version 2. This came out of a residency at the World Trade Center. Was it?
2000.
Was it 2000? 2000.
Came in 2000.
And basically, when we're invited to be, artists are invited to participate in this residency program, and you do a project that's particular to the place, being that it's very specific. And my piece at the time, noticing as I was leaving the building, going to the studio on the 91st floor, the workers there and who they were and who I was, and that when I walked around Lower Manhattan in the middle of the day, people assumed in my painting suit, they assumed I was a maintenance worker in my blue Dickie suit. And they would ask questions, what do you do? How do you get to do this? And the place socioeconomically of people of color. And so this maintenance lady I met this maintenance woman in the elevator going up, and I heard the elevator music. Here comes the sun, da, da, da. And I thought, about relationship of Muzak and productivity theory and work and labor. And I wanted to change the Muzak for one day through their contractor, which is a Seattle-based organization, Channel 17, to change it to songs like Hi Ho, it's off to work we go. And so I wanted to do this conceptual piece for my one-day open house, and I couldn't get it through. It was $30,000 to get this satellite up there to change. I had my own channel. So I did this piece. It's kind of like Alan McComb's surrogate paintings, but what it was is that I wanted to make in a 12-inch by 12-inch speaker box a voice for each tenant in the World Trade Center, and there was, at the time, I believe like 435 tenants. So I basically started to create these little grid paintings and had records pressed of a work song called Go Down, Oh Hannah, that I had gotten from the Library of Congress's collection. Mixed that with Living Stereo's Music for Dining, because I was also working with the idea of global capitalism as cannibalism. This is a smaller version of it called Infrastructure 4. It's basically one of the tenants. This piece is called Like. It's also very about the self. It's basically two small speakers, and these are terrible slides. It has script going across. This is basically a list of things that I liked on the day that I made it. Changes. This is Das Oxide House version 2. It's just another version of the piece you saw earlier. It's taller. One of the things you don't see here, and I haven't been able to capture, is that when you heard the audio, which was, and It's probably also best to play audio with these slides because the pieces are, it's a very important part of it. The mix of holy laughter and speaking in tongues. There was blue light in the middle of the speakers and it would pulse because I wanted this kind of holy evangelical. And then also in the space, I also had, can't see a little bit of it, it had blue fluorescent lighting. So from the street you could see like this kind of heavenly light. It's a church. This is Tower Hollers, the final version. This was exhibited at the MoMA in Queens, the inaugural show. One summer, it's probably 30 by 60 feet. No, 15 by 60 feet. There's 12 record players and all the tenants of the World Trade Center. Close up. This is a portrait, kind of portrait. It's called White We. Basically, it's a piece about myself, my relationship to other black women, and the audio from it came from Mahogany, like the Black Woman Cinderella story. So I took that part of the audio when Anthony Perkins. I'm sorry for these. Perhaps this is so specific. I'm not sure if everyone catches what I'm talking about. The movie Mahogany with Diana Ross, in which she's Chicago seamstress and she's swept away and discovered in Rome, becomes a wonderful, beautiful model and fashion designer, and then goes back to Chicago to Billy D. Williams. But in any case, I took the audio in which Anthony Perkins discovers her in a store and is spinning her around and around, and she's going, wee, wee, wee. So I took that audio and just looped it. And that's what you hear. In the center of that is a small speaker that you hear we. And so it talks about me and you, we, the black woman. And it's also the time that I was introduced through the work that had German titles and German references. I was introduced to Germany and felt a little bit like that. The slides are kind of mixed up. I guess I didn't get the prompt. That's backwards. So this is Bunter. It references the German flag. Bunt, the color field painting. Oh, there we go. Sorry I didn't get to organize it so well, but so basically you can see my work is textural, whether it's fiber, sound.
That committee, and I can see that it has chosen these three artists being an example of who it's chosen. Three very articulate artistic voices. So there's something that you have in common. You're very different from each other, there's no question about that. But there's something in common in how the choosing was done, or in who became chosen, that is very articulate in how those voices are expressed, and in a way in the kind of iconography, and in particular with Deborah, because her work is all about a kind of personal iconography. But each of the artists has something that ties them together that tells me a lot about how the program works.
Right.
Or what its intent was. I don't know if I'm close, but that's my perception of it.
I have never worked with an artist at the Studio Museum or the Whitney Museum or independently who hasn't been articulate. I'll put it that way, black, white, Asian, or other. So I don't think it is an exception or, I mean, it's certainly a compliment, but I think that applies to anyone who thinks deep and long and hard about the work, whether it's paint on a paintbrush going onto a canvas, or a poem that gets written on a piece of paper and crumpled up and tossed off the 59th Street Bridge. So I think that, for me, remains very separate from, and I'd be happy to discuss the process of the artist in residence selection. Taste, I think, is a very subjective thing. It is a very competitive program, and as you were saying before in your introduction, we have a long list of very impressive alumni: Neri Ward, David Hammonds, Julie Maritou, et cetera, et cetera. We have at least a few hundred applicants every year. These historically, I would say not even historically, because that sort of makes us think, oh, the 50s and the 60s, but really through the 90s, these are artists who, whether because of race, whether because of the systems that say this artist's work is interesting and is making work that is germane to society today, most of artists of color historically have been kept out of major institutions. And that's just a fact if you look at any sort of list or past history of anything. And I think because one big reason why is because the art historians or people who are sitting on these panels saying that's good work, that's bad work, the frame of reference is of a smaller dimension. The way that we select our artists in residence is Thelma Golden, the now director, chief curator, and myself are on a panel with outside curators and art historians and critics, and artists who've been on our panels are Gregory Coates, Franklin Sermons, Sarah Lewis, Isolde Brillmeyer, Unji Ju, a number of people from around the country. So I don't think there's taste so much as I like a certain kind of art and I'm choosing the artist to get into this program which I manage, but rather we're looking for those young critical voices and perspectives in the people who are looking at work and not looking at the work from Jansen's to, to the Met and then to where we are right now, but whose lenses for looking at painting on a wall or sound being emitted from a painting, what that work is about and all the things that go into the work.
Thank you. Someone in the audience?
Yes.
Wait for a mic.
Okay. My question is for Kehinde, and you said you're not romantic about art. In fact, you think that its communicative capabilities are limited. And I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about what those limitations are, especially in reference to your work.
Right. I make high-priced luxury goods for wealthy consumers, and I know it, they know it. It kind of changes the content of the work too. I mean, it's okay, and it's quite possibly a communicative tool, acknowledging it and allowing the language to evolve into something a bit more complex. I think that art is limited insofar as we as a society view it as something that should be relegated to the wealthy few. As long as we create these artificial barriers concerning what popular culture is and what fine art is, I think many of us in art schools now, as I go around the country and around the world, see a lot of artists dismantling artificial borders, not only within the artistic academies, but within literature and within gender studies. One of my favorite writers, Richard Scott and Richard Dyer, started thinking about why it is that we have Native American studies and African American studies, but no whiteness studies. And this question of who gets to define what the rules are and who gets to define that sinew that separates sectors of society is one it's really prevalent out there, and it's a really pregnant time right now, I think, for artists and thinkers alike who really just don't want to exist in these fixed terms. What you find is that whiteness studies is something that's particularly hard to define because identity is something that white people have been able to take for granted and morph into full human beings. And I think that the very question of whiteness studies is just as preposterous as that one of African American studies and so on. And it's just as preposterous as the notion of that Nadine shouldn't be able to have a painting speak at you. It's kind of like that.
I think the whiteness studies, that's coming in the third Bush administration. Stay tuned.
I actually thought we were having it right now in this administration, but maybe nobody's writing it down. My question isn't really a question. I'd like to address it to. I'm sorry because I missed most of your piece. Could you say your name again? The man who just spoke.
Kehinde Wiley.
Kehinde Wiley.
High-priced goods. Who? Kehinde Wiley.
Kehinde Wiley.
You know, when I was an artist and 20, I can remember thinking I could escape all the categories because art, in my case at that point, it was theater. I thought I could live in a borderless world where the content of the communication and the passion behind it was all that mattered, and everybody was a human being, you know. But I'm 63 now, and I know better. I'm very touched by what you just referenced. I'm very moved by the articulateness of this panel. It's been a long time. It's just personal since I've heard a group of talented people express so brilliantly so many references that are our concern. So that's it. There's really no question.
Thank you. I wish it wasn't so surprising. No, I wish that because here you have 3 black artists, and the expectation should be no less than 3 artists who have incredible careers for people in their 30s.
She's a regular here, so I think she's criticizing the content of our other panels.
It was just personal. It was just very moving.
Thank you.
I mean, I get it in literature, and I got it when I was a student. It wasn't in political classes.
Over there.
I'm just curious to ask the panel, do you see a differentiation between West Coast artists and East Coast artists?
In terms of commerce or in terms of the work? No, I don't. I think there's high quality. I think it's the Mecca, it's the money. And I guess, only speaking personally, I guess as an emerging artist, I get tired of talking about the idea of riverfront property as an idea. I thought coming in as an emerging artist, the ideas were going to be about expressing dialogue about the work and about ideas. And I guess sometimes I get frustrated with it being saturated with money. So when I do get those moments with curators, or I do get those moments with other fellow artists where the dialogue can open up, where it's talking about conversations on the West Coast. Christine mentioned Unji Ju as an example. Getting dialogues with her or getting any information that she's able to send from Red Cat. I find that it opens things up in a different way, and I'm seeing that West Coast artists, at least the stuff that I've been receiving for the West Coast, is not a lot about money. It's more about the actual content and the conversation, and less about the academic, too. It's about the act and the actual art-making process, the dialoguing about that. I'm not knocking money. I'm just saying that I guess sometimes I get tired of all the money conversation here in New York, and I wish it would shift back a little bit more to not just the dialogue just on emerging artists, mid-career, established artists, those black...
The institutions, there was like
Live in one place or the other. I'm just talking about the aesthetics and the creative process of art. I think there's a tremendous difference, and I'm just curious, as young emerging artists, are you able to differentiate that in your mind or not, or do you still buy into the syndrome that New York has the barometer in which one needs to exist in order to validate their work?
If you might not be interested, I can answer from a curator's perspective.
Yeah.
Artists, I believe that regionalism is gone or is fading away, but West Coast artists have much more allegiance or adherence to their art schools. Whether you studied under Catherine Opie or you're a UCLA or a Cal Arts person, that who you studied under as a sort of mentor, having a mentor-protege relationship, seems to have more impact on the work. You can see it, you can feel it in the work. And I think that in New York, you have an extraordinary range, but back to the issue of the fact that it's, we do have 7 or 8 pretty good residency programs around the tri-state area for emerging artists, if you can get in, and if you follow through and all of those things. But really, the pragmatics of it is that 8 out of 10 works you make, a dealer will tell you needs to be sellable, or I can't carry you as an artist, or the tie, as much as I don't or we don't like to see it as so tied in with commerce, the fact is these are people who need to pay rent. So that fact puts a different kind of pressure on object making for artists who are in New York.
Yeah, you can be a lot. In LA, there's a really sort of like slacker mentality. I think it does have to do with the lower cost of living. But another thing that
get a little closer to the mic, please. Thanks.
Sorry. I think one thing that I've noticed as a student of art and cultural absorber, I think, is that in the West Coast, people are a lot more stuck on their, what I call like lifestyle narcissism. I'm a surfer, I'm a skater, there's scene art, there's like gay art, there's, in the institutions, there was like the UCLA tape scene, and it's very sort of sceney, whereas in New York it feels a bit more sort of dog eat dog, I don't give a fuck what you're doing, I'm doing my thing, you know what I mean? And it's not so like I'm defining myself as this.
I just find it interesting, born and raised in Harlem, living in the West Coast differentiation.
What years were you in Harlem?
I was born in Harlem.
You were born in
39,
Harlem.
went to school and everything. And then I went to graduate school on the East Coast, but at the same time, I've been living.
Are you an artist?
Struggling with that.
Hello. I think it's obvious that portions of the audience, myself included, are definitely suffering from some borders of the imagination. And how do you, and this is specifically for Nadine Robinson, how do you, you specifically, you speak a lot about postmodernism in your work. And what I wanted to know, but your work seems slightly more forward than postmodernism. And I wanted to know how you might attempt to define, what you're involved in currently.
Oh, I stopped defining it a long time ago. What ailment do you suffer from?
What?
What you said that the
I said
audience
borders
suffered?
of the Western imagination. Just saying.
What?
Borders of the Western imagination.
Borders of the Western imagination.
Right.
Can you define that?
I'm not sure. When I say that, I kind of am thinking about just kind of things that have come up even right here with what people are saying, and like kind of going off of what kind of Kahinde said about this whole idea of whiteness and how it's so in your face that you really can't see it. And no matter how many borders you cross, you might hit another one. So there's always going to be infinite amounts of exploration. But my question, that was just more of a comment, but my question for you, not so much defined, because you didn't mention things about constructs of postmodernism in your work, which by definition that does mean you're kind of defining, but your work does seem a bit more forward than that. So
it's forward. It is forward. But when I talk about postmodernism, this kind of point of departure after leaving the institution in like 1997. Then you did residencies, and you're still a little bit part of it. But like Kahinde said, it's one foot in front of the other, and you're kind of like feeling your way through the darkness. and then you bump into whiteness. But the point is that it really is just one day at a time. You do what is, you do what you need to do, what you impel. You're compelled to make these works, you're impelled to make this painting, you're impelled to create this artwork. And so you just go in the studio, you go into the world and you do it, and then the defining of it is not as important. And I could put labels out there, post, pre, after, anti-postmodernism, and it's and there's different definitions for them. There's different cultural theories have different ways of defining what it is, and then there's a general overlapping. But the idea of hope as well, the hope of being progressive, and what comes after postmodernism. I mean, I haven't been an institutional for a while. What are we studying now? What is the dominant cultural theory in this school? Can anyone name a class? Commercialism. This is a class called commercialism?
We did a panel here last spring called postmodernism.
Postmodernism.
Very popular, packed house.
Post-contemporary.
Is it post-contemporary?
Futuristic.
And we told people they should join us next year for postmodernism.
No, I was just saying, I just found it interesting just because there's always going to be people who try to put labels on those kind of things. So if you had any ideas about how you felt where you're in it, because obviously you're in the creative moment of making, but, you know, if you want to be a part of a movement or not, you know.
Sometimes. I'm kind of ambivalent usually, go back and forth, like a love and hate. I can't say, I hate, you know, when I'm talking about my work, talking about myself, I hate to commit to one thing. Because I'm not sure. And a lot of it has to do with where we are in the world now, this kind of anxiety, which leads to my recent work that I completed at the, as is now, but Studio Museum in Harlem, if you guys can get up there, and called Alles Grau, which is the German for all, the full title is Alles Grau and Graumalen, which is a German term, means to paint everything gray or pessimistically. There is an anxiety, and I guess it says a pessimism as to where we are today, where I am personally as well, and so I'm ambiguous with where my place is. But then again, I also looked up the meaning of my name, and it means hope. So superstitiously, I'm looking forward to changes in the future. But and I also know that, and I also think that. I assume that every generation goes through this, and so that we're not unique. That perhaps in just before the fall of Rome, the Romans felt a certain sense of pessimism, and so we're maybe going through that now. But you know, even when I am presenting my work at a panel, beginning to talk about it, I still feel uncomfortable. I begin to feel more uncomfortable each time that I talk about it, because it's this idea that you know what you're doing. And you just do what you have to do. You do what you need to do. You're compelled to do this. It's not this idea where I'm going to be an artist because I need to, you know, buy a house and have, you know, get married and have kids. It's this idea that I need to do this, and then afterwards you start to think, well, what am I doing? And you know, so you just go into the studio. You don't think. You feel yourself. You feel your way through the darkness, whether emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, experientially.
Can I just comment on two things that I think are interesting? What your question makes me think a bit of Zizek. I don't know if you've read any of his work, but it's sort of about, or theories based on the idea that in order to figure out where you're going, you need to know where you're coming from. So in order to paint, you need to, to understand the principles of modernism, and to understand the histories of modernism if you're an artist, or your own history or culture, is not something to mimic, but to know. And if you don't know that, to know what to do afterwards is problematic. The second thing is, which is I think one mode in which these artists, and others as well work, correct me if I'm wrong, is Solowit once said, and I'm sorry I don't know this quote verbatim, but an artist closes his or her eyes and envisions the work and sets out to make it as it exists in his or her mind. And along that path, he or she makes and discovers all sorts of things. And the path of getting there, as it changes, he or she will discard pieces that get picked up later, some maybe, others not, that get picked up later that become other works or parts of other works. So I think, that in my experience in working with these three artists and other artists is the distance from defining themselves in categories of postmodern, so on and so forth, and in moving toward knowing their own history as individuals, as artists, as understanding works of literature or history, a la Zizek, and then apropos LeWitt, this sort of just moving, as Kehinde said, one step in front of another, but carefully discarding things, working toward the object that he or she envisions, to only to come back to them and have those evolve. So clearly it's this sort of non-linear, intuitive process, as opposed to a categorical one.
Molly Nesbitt, who's one of my professors up at Yale, she recently wrote this essay for, the last Documenta, called Port of Calls, and it was a great metaphor for the artist. I love the idea of like closing your eyes and there's shards, but I think also for so many black artists, identity becomes an overriding function of how to engage yourself, and identity is this sort of presence, non-presence, perpetually. I think in today's times, as Deborah spoke before, identity is a lot more troubled than this binary system that we have. And Molly proposed this type of global metaphor. The mind of the artist becomes the world, and you imagine a type of boat, and one sort of goes from port to port. I guess the essay was called Port of Calls. And the idea is that the art-making process is that idea of going from one set of identities to the other. Perhaps as you go from one society to the next, by the time you return, it's changed, all this sort of morphing. But to pin down this it's a hard thing, and I think that's why what we end up with are these sort of poetic, metaphorical responses to this. It almost becomes as artful to pin down the process as it is to make it itself.
Who's got the mic? Pass it down.
Hi, I have a question. Okay. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about your experiences before going to school, before going to art school, with art or art making, and how that had affected or not affected your process of creating art. I know Nadine Robinson spoke a little bit about how she had moved to the Bronx when she was young, and maybe how that had affected her artwork, but I don't know, do you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, I always drew, and I was just at my mother's house last week, and I found my art award from Cardinal Spelman High School. I took it home. So, I'm sure it's similar stories. You drew, you're 7, 8 years old, you have drawings and competitions, and this is what you sung. My father said I daydreamed. And I was watching CNN, the Genius series, the importance of daydreaming, the genius. Not saying I'm a genius, perhaps I am. And also creative, that when we talk about the Port of Calls, it's not only just for artists, scientists, inventors, people that really go out there in the world. The creative imagination and aesthetic communications is not specific to the artist. The problem solving, creative problem solving, and there's probably the artist probably has that moment in twilight, probably between 5 and 8, when their daydreams come alive and they want to put it to paper, put it to film, put it to writing, put it to performance, put it out there in the world, and maybe it's like a dream, sometimes nonsensical, but beautiful all the same.
Deborah, I remember once you explained to me that your art practice came out of a certain, especially in your experience living in Brooklyn, Coney Island, a sort of escapism, and that leading into your art studies and picking up the Kara Walker book. Perhaps that might be an illuminating story to go into, of like the moment of recognition of like, this is what I do, this is an artist. Was it when you were an undergrad?
When I was undergrad at Columbia College in Chicago. I guess, how can I describe it? Why at Columbia College I was able to figure out, actually I should say when I was at Skowhegan, I realized there were systems. Coming out of Columbia College in Chicago, it was a small program. I had 2 central teachers I dealt with, Hollis Siegler and MacArthur Binion. These 2 teachers basically gave me an understanding of the art world, but not clearly the contemporary end of it. But I figured out how the systems worked when I got to Skowhegan. And it was either being a part of or not being a part of. So I decided not to be a part of it, if you understand what I mean by that. And I guess when first time I saw Kara Walker's work, it was a show that she was doing in Atlanta at the time. It was a small space, and it was a small catalog, simple catalog. It was sort of like sort of a Black Weekly. And on the cover, it was her silhouettes. And I thought, this is it. It was like looking at Bill Traylor, or it's like looking at folk work, or even going down to the Visionary Museum. Maybe I'm going off, but I guess what I'm saying is, it's the moments where people who don't get a voice, I guess I was looking for. And Kara, in a way, gave me a voice, I thought, just by seeing those silhouettes and how she did them and how they were put together and how they were presented. The fact that she broke away from the idea of the rectangle, or broke away from the idea of what is considered even the idea of ethnic work, the idea of identity politics. She pissed people off. I mean, and I love that. I thought that was fantastic. She got hit up from the end of older African-American artists. She got hit from the end, from every other end you can possibly think of. So I just thought there was something interesting about what she was doing, what she was saying about that history. And I think about when she did speak at the Studio Museum, probably about two or 3 years ago, and she talked about feeling like a Vietnam vet. That idea, when she went from Los Angeles to the South, it was being opened up to something so brand new and something that she had no inkling of what she was digging herself into, and all the grief that she went through with doing that work. I guess that was part of it. But it was, for me, it was just knowing that that the systems aren't necessarily built on just money. I kind of disagree with that. I don't think they're just built just on money. They're built on ideas of people's thoughts and processes. It's just human beings. Maybe I'm a little square about this, but I just feel like there are levels between what you're willing to learn and what you're not willing to learn. So I guess that's what I was trying to learn from Kara's work and seeing that first quarterly, that it was basically speaking to me that was not just a cover of the Art in America or a cover of Art Forum, that it was speaking from something different.
One last question from back there. Go ahead.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you for being here on a Friday evening in New York City. There's probably a lot of other places we could all be. My painting's about Mr. Wiley's paintings, but if any of the panelists have a answer to my question or thought on it, I'm welcome. Why do you formally paint your paintings the way you do? Why are they flat? Why is there no texture, or just your thoughts on the formal qualities of your paintings?
You mean like thicker paint for certain areas, different techniques?
Impasto.
Yeah. All right. So, if I'm quoting, let's say, a Franz Hals or something, occasionally I'll use an impasto technique, but generally I try to use a sort of generalized technique. I think tied very strongly to the conceptual conceits of my work, which is that I'm trying to shadow dance behind some of the great masters, but also insert my own type of technical ambitions as well. So I think the best way for me to operate, both conceptually and formally, has to do with a sort of flattening.
I just had one question
okay.
too. Maybe
Be brief, please.
Okay, very brief. Well, Deborah, I was really moved by what you said about trying to understand something that's really important to us with making art. To stem back from the Second World War, I actually just ended up reading some bit on Chantal Mouffe, and that's kind of one of her platforms that she used, was talking about this idea of what we can really learn is not what we're trying to present as new information, but more like a re-understanding of old information that can be almost just like reworked and then brought forth into this time now. And I feel like your paintings, and also maybe for the whole panel, but yourself and Kehinde, I feel like what you guys are commenting on, or maybe you're arguing for in the work that you make. Kehinde, you spoke of that your base for consumers that buy your work are rich and wealthy and of color, and it's almost about this figuring of this like subject positionality that we have in these systems, and it's like this expansion on that. And could you say that you're maybe arguing for a new type of universal hegemony, or is this something that is even out there, or should we even consider that to be an answer?
I think you've hit on something really, really, really important that has not come up in this panel that usually does at one point or another, which is, if Damien Hirst can do it, why can't I? You know, and agency and power. When I first saw Kehinde's work, I laughed. I mean, it made me laugh. It was just ridiculous, and I said to a colleague, shit, this guy can paint. You know, and it was this combination of like this material, the resource material of the hip hop and the Rococo and the Louis Vuitton and all of that, and the fact that he can paint. But I think what you're getting at is if the insertion of people of color or emerging artists or oppressed peoples, or however you want to define it, in different cases it's different situations, different things, but accessing certain conversations by directly inserting him or herself into the conversation by the act of making that kind of art, whether minimalist, formal,